Hi, I'm Chris Young from Micro Focus, and in this video I'm going to be showing you how to take a Selenium script that was written for JUnit and might be performing slowly, and we're going to convert it to DevWeb, which is Micro Focus's high-performance JavaScript-based load testing platform. To get started, we're going to need a Selenium script. So I'm going to go into the Selenium IDE component for recording Selenium scripts within Chrome, and I'm going to record a new test. Now we're going to call this automation practice, and we're going to hit this particular URL, automationpractice.com. This is a great site for testing, Selenium scripting. So I'm going to go ahead and start the recording here, and as you can see, I'm now recording in the IDE. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to do a little simple transaction. I'm going to go here to this blouse, and I'm going to click it, and then I'm going to add it to the cart. I'm going to hit the proceed to checkout, and then we're going to hit that one more time, and it should bring us to this step 2, which is the authentication page. Now if I look over here, I can see each of these steps inside of here. So we're going to go ahead and do one last step manually. I'm going to do a little assert text. So inside of here we can check to see if a particular element, and in this case I'm going to click this element right here, we're going to see if that element contains the word authentication. Okay, and this will be our little sample test. Now I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording here, and we're going to call this add blouse to cart. Alright, now inside of here I'm going to do a couple other things. You can see Selenium has recorded these with CSS selectors, but if we drop down this list we can get it in other ways. And I'm going to go ahead and take it by doing an XPath position here, and I'm going to do that for each one of these just to make it a little bit easier. You can see we're going to use this add to cart. This will give me a little bit of a verbal description on what we're doing here as well, and then we'll do the last one. We'll go to this second one there. All right, now just to test this very quickly, we'll go ahead and save it, and we're going to save this thing as automation practice. And now we'll have a side file right here, and we've got that saved in case we ever need to use it again. But I'm going to go ahead and test this by running it right here. And as you can see, we're going to go through this, click the proceed, and then we're going to check to see if this is authentication. Just to show you, what would happen here, let's try to do something. Let's just call this not authentication, right? And then we'll close this out and rerun it again, and what you'll see is now instead of being green it'll be red because it's not going to find that text not authentication. So we've got a good functional test here, and now we're going to go ahead and figure out how to upsize this thing and turn it into a DevWeb script so it can run as a performance test. So now that we have a functional test, we could go over here, we could export this thing to Java JUnit. You can see I'm going to go ahead and export it. It's going to create me a Java source file. I'll go ahead and download this thing, and then I have an Eclipse project over here, right, with a little framework app that just tests a whole series of JUnit. I could go over here, I could bring this Java file in here. You can see here are the commands that were run. What I did in this utility here was I broke those commands into their individual pieces and wrapped them in a little transaction that can be timed separately so that we can get the timings on each of these different clicks. You can see here's a POM XML file. I'll make all this available in the artifacts down in the comments section. We could go in here, we could dissect this thing and turn it into a Java class, wrap it in JUnit, and use this as our functional test. But I'm going to show you a little bit easier way to convert this to a native JavaScript DevWeb script that will run and perform better within LoadRunner. So now instead of using Java, I have a little utility over here. You can see I've got a launch profile inside of Visual Studio. There are two components that ship with DevWeb. There's something that's called a ProxyRecorder. You can see here's the path to that, this little exe. and then we also have an offline generator which will take a HAR file recorded by the proxy recorder and convert it to a DevWeb script. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and set this up. Let's go ahead and run. You can see we're going to start up the proxy recorder first. So I'm going to go ahead and run the proxy recorder, get it running in capture mode. You can see it's going to initialize here, and then it's running on 8156. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here to my network, and I am going to go into the proxy section, and I'm going to go ahead and enable that proxy. You can see we're going to be using localhost 8156. We're going to go ahead and say OK to this and apply it, and now my proxy recorder is going to start recording anything that I do. So if I come over here and I replay this transaction, you're going to see it's going to go ahead and execute, through this screen. But as it's doing it, the proxy recorder is capturing all the traffic. So now that we've run this and everything has run successfully, I'm going to go ahead and stop this by hitting the enter key, and it's now going to create me a HAR file. So I can go ahead and close this window where we ran our script, and now we're ready to convert this into DevWeb. So pretty easy to do this next step once we have our HAR file and we've recorded our transaction, essentially by replaying the Selenium side file. We're now going to go right over here into this proxy recorder HAR file, and we're going to convert it into a DevWeb script. So all I have to do is execute that statement here where we call the offline generator in HAR mode, and we point it to our HAR file, and then it's going to go ahead and create us a directory with all of our transaction data inside of it. Each one of these transactions is one of the steps from inside our Selenium script over here. So you can see here's where we first load the page, and then we click the add to cart, and each one of these transactions is captured inside of here. So I'm going to pause for a second, and then I'm going to show you some ways where we can supplement this and put transaction markers around each of these so that we can time each of these transactions individually. So now that we have our DevWeb script, if you recall, here was our Selenium IDE file. When we tested these commands, you can see how it captured the timestamps of when everything began here. So I'm going to do a little something similar real quick. I'm going to edit this toolkit. I'm going to edit these transactions manually and put a start and stop timer on these. So we're done with the Selenium IDE. I'm going to go ahead and close this out. And so I'm going to go right over into here, and I'm going to edit this transaction, and I'm going to put a little framework around it. You can see here is how we put transaction start and stop timers. So in here I create a little JavaScript variable that's going to create me a transaction called OpenPage, and then here's where it starts and here's where it stops. So I'm going to go ahead and take this stop, paste it a little bit down the bottom here. So essentially what's going to happen is we're creating us a new transaction called OpenPage. Here's where we're going to begin the stopwatch and call the start method. We're going to execute our request. When the request returns and finishes up, then we'll stop that transaction. So I'm going to go ahead and do that for each of these transactions here so that we can get a little stopwatch of each one independently. So let me go ahead and paste the stop commands down bottom here on each one of these. And then we'll go in here and grab our little naming identifiers. So in this one, instead of this being called OpenPage, it's now click blouse. And then we will do this one here, which will be proceed to checkout. Yeah, and we'll do this one here, which will be see, what was that? That was OpenPage, click blouse. I think this was add to cart is our next one. Then it is proceed to checkout. And then finally our last transaction is, check out step 2. Now, in all these, I'm just going to let these, start and stop naturally. But on this last one, I'm going to change something here. I'm going to add a little something on this stop. So we're going to do, if you remember earlier, we sort of had a tester inside of our, that assert text inside of our Selenium script. So I'm going to do something similar here. We've got a little piece that's called an extractor. And what this extractor is going to do is it's going to find something like, in this case, you can see it's a start and a stop of a span tag with the navigation page. This was where that little authentication text was. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and validate that. So we're creating an extractor. We're going to call it spanBoundary. And then inside the stop transaction here, what we're going to do is, instead of just stopping it and letting it have a default value, we're actually going to go over here and we're going to check out the transaction. We're basically going to say web response 5 extractors, our spanBoundary extractor, which looks inside of that little span tag. We're going to trim that off and we're going to see if the value equals authentication. And if it does, we're going to pass the test, and if it doesn't, we're going to fail the test. So we'll go ahead and save this. And now we are ready to run this in a test environment before we upload it to our production load runner environment. So one of the neat things about DevWeb scripts is that you can actually test these locally before you upload them to your server environment for full production run. So in this case, you can see I've got this main.js right here. We've got a task profile where we can do, single runs or a load run in this case, and we'll run this thing to the end. So I'm gonna go ahead and do a quick single run on this thing. If I wanted to do multiple runs, matter of fact, we'll go ahead and run this multiple times. So I'm going to do 3 virtual users. We won't do any pacing, and let's run this for a duration of 10 seconds, right? So we're going to run 3 simultaneous transactions here. We'll go ahead and save this, right? And here it is. We'll go ahead and run this as a quick load test. So I'm going to go right in here. I'm going to do my run test, and we're going to run this as a load run. And what you're going to see is now it's hitting against that website, testing locally, recording all of my results, and giving me the ability to sort of debug and test this thing before I upload it to a production environment for a real load test, right? And you can see, when this thing finishes, here we are. You can see that we've got our authentication and these things pass. So in this entire, as we ran these, you'll see there was a database created here. I'm going to go ahead and open this database, and if we go under our little explorer here, right, here's our database. You can see, the number of bytes sent. Let me close this out so you can see it here. Here's each one of those transactions, how much was sent in each one of those transactions, all of the different connections. But let's go ahead and look at, hits, which would be used for calculating hits per second. We've also got our transactions here, so we'll go ahead and pull this over and take a look at it. You can see here's each of our transactions. OpenPage, you can see these are taking somewhere around 1200 milliseconds to execute. Our click blouse is 1400 to 1700 here. Add to cart, right, and all these things are passing. Let's just do a little quick test, right, just to make sure that we're in good shape here. Make sure that authentication was there. Let's say, authentication X. So I'm going to go right into here. I'm going to go ahead and save that real quick. This should create a failure. So what I'm going to do real quickly now is I'm going to run this as just a quick single run, right? And we should see that now the transaction fails, right? So now that it failed, we'll go back into our results again, grab off our database, open that database, bring it up into the SQL Explorer, make sure that we refresh it. We'll run our transactions here, and what we should see is a new set of transactions, as you can see, right, in that checkout step 2, it is now failed. Right? So that's the idea behind it. You know, we're doing a real simple assert statement, validating that everything is correct, and now we're ready to upload this to our production environment. So now that we've got our DevWeb script and everything is tested correctly, it's now time to upload that to our server environment. So over here, you can see that I have you know, my LoadRunner cloud test environment here. You can see I have my load tests inside of here and all of my script assets. I'm going to go ahead and add a load test here. So you know, we can use our little utility. As you can see, we've got a little app.js here that will prompt us for our username and password for LoadRunner, and then it's going to take our directory called ProxyRecorder. You can see we have this little push to cloud function, which is going to take a source directory, an asset name, a test name. You give it values for these, and then whether you want to run the test. So I'm going to take this ProxyRecorder folder. I'm going to turn that into a script called ProxyRecorder script, and then I'm going to create a load test around that and go ahead and run this thing off. So what you're going to see when I run this is it's now going to package that up, and then it's going to push it up into the cloud and set this thing starting off and running. So if I go right over here and we say node run, it's going to prompt me down bottom here for my password. I'm going to go ahead and enter that in. You can see it's logging in, calling all the REST calls to add this to the environment. What you're going to see is when it's done, hey, it created me a new script that's ID 91 and a new load test called 109, and then it's kicked off that test. So if we go right over into here and we refresh this page, you'll see that we've got that new ProxyRecorder test. It's actually initializing right now. So I'm going to go ahead and click on it. All right, and let's see, you know, we're using 5 V users, 40 seconds. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this up. You can see it's initializing. I'm going to pause for a few seconds and we're going to let this thing run. Now, when I paused recording a few moments ago, you might have noticed I was on run 90. I accidentally left that authentication X in there, so this test would fail. So I had to delete and recreate it, and now I'm letting it run again. So as you can see, we're incrementally one more run ahead. It was 90, we're now on 91. I'm going to go ahead and let this thing run. You're going to see it start provisioning some V users, and then it's going to run through the test. So I'm going to pause it here for a moment while the interface catches up and AWS provisions the load generators. Okay, so now the load generators are spooling up the number of running V users. You can see we've got some throughput, we've got some hits per second, and we're tracking whether there are any errors or not. So we're going to go ahead and pause this for a moment and let it finish running. Continuing to generate some V users here. Now we're ramping down, should be finishing up right now. And we'll see that our tests are complete. And if we come over here to our transaction summary, you can see here's our ProxyRecorder scripts, right? The add to cart, the checkout, the click browse, the open page, each one of these. You can see all these different transactions. Here they are, the max, the average, the min of each of those transactions. We ran it 21 times, and you can see the pieces here. Now, everything that was done has been created inside of an email. While that job finished, you can see it basically sent me off you know, a test, and we can see which ones. There's some SLA stuff in here. I didn't really specify an SLA, but you can see certain ones of these transactions took considerably longer than some of the others. So there was some failure rate in here around that, but we do have quite a few transactions that ran, and they all ran successfully, and they're all inside of here. So StormRunner ran this and then sent me a report. And that's it. That is how to create a Selenium test, turn it into DevWeb, and then run it in high performance mode against your application under test using Load Runner or Performance Center.